Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Rebecca Poole, and I'm the Director of Membership and Communication for the Council of New York Cooperatives and Condominiums, or CNYC. CNYC is a membership organization for co-ops and condos, and as such, we're funded primarily by membership dues. We provide education, information, and advocacy for New York City's co-ops and condos, and have been doing so for over 40 years. On behalf of our speakers, Peter Varsalona and Thomas Morrisson, and our Executive Director, Marianne Rothman, I would like to thank you for spending your evening with us and welcome you to this, our 9th class in our Sustainability with Affordability series. CNYC has been working both internally and externally for several years to champion the implementation of Local Law 97 through incentives, abatements, rebates, and subsidies in place of penalties and fines in order to enable our member buildings to meet the city's necessary but ambitious carbon reduction goals. Everyone on CNYC's board, as well as CNYC's staff, is a homeowner in a cooperative or condominium. Like you, our buildings face many widespread financial and regulatory issues, of which Local Law 97 is just one component. CNYC continues to stress the cost of city rules and regulations at every opportunity, and the fact that it doesn't work to enforce rules that people cannot afford to follow. We hope you will subscribe to our e-blasts and join our advocacy efforts to maintain the affordability needed for shareholders and unit owners to remain in their homes while complying with city regulations, rules, laws, and codes. Please feel free to email me for more information or look on our website. We have several efforts that are ongoing right now regarding Local Law 97. And now for tonight's class. It is my pleasure to introduce your speakers for this evening. Peter Varsalona is the president of the Council of New York Cooperatives and Condominiums and has served on the executive board since 2019. He has taught multiple classes for CNYC and has given very generously of his time in reviewing city rules, regulations, and legislation and providing guidance to the board. Peter is the principal and vice president at Rand Engineering and Architecture, where he heads the firm's building design group, focusing on multi-team, large-scale projects featuring a wide range of scope items. Mr. Varsalona has extensive experience managing the design and upgrade of building envelope and major building-wide systems, and has prepared dozens of plans and specifications for large-scale system upgrades, including heating and cooling plants, gas and water piping, oil-to-gas conversions, electrical wiring and metering, and fire-protecting roofing replacement, and exterior facade repairs and restoration. He has spoken and written on building design and performance for a number of industry groups and has been quoted for his building expertise in the New York Times, The Cooperator, Brick Underground, and other publications, and has also appeared on New York One's Real Estate Report discussing how to spot common defects in newly built properties. Mr. Varsalona is a licensed professional engineer in New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, and Pennsylvania, as well as a certified energy manager, a certified building commissioning professional, and a certified New York State asbestos inspector, management planner, and project designer. Thomas Morrisson is a 20-year veteran of the energy industry and has been with npower Group since 2010, playing a pivotal role in leading the company's energy management and metering services. As the Director of Energy Management, Thomas oversees the development and implementation of decarbonization solutions, including clean energy and energy-efficient technologies, energy and financial analysis, acquisition due diligence, forecasting, benchmarking, procurement, and sustainability reporting. He has successfully led renewable energy and decarbonization projects such as grid-connected fuel cells, solar installations, and battery energy storage systems, helping clients meet their sustainability goals while enhancing asset value. In addition to his work on decarbonization initiatives, Thomas has been instrumental in helping clients comply with local energy and carbon regulations. He has guided property owners, real estate developers, and asset managers through complex regulatory requirements, such as local greenhouse gas emissions reporting laws and energy efficiency mandates, ensuring they meet both current and evolving standards. Prior to npower, Thomas worked as a senior energy analyst at MC Energy, now Yardi Energy Services, where he led procurement strategies for commercial real estate portfolios and developed sustainability strategies, greenhouse gas emissions reports, and energy tracking platforms. Both Peter and Thomas will be giving classes at CNYC's upcoming annual housing conference on November 17th. Peter will be teaching a class on Local Law 97 compliance and a class on maintaining your building envelope, and Thomas will be presenting a class on affordable and achievable goals under Local Law 97. In addition to those 3 classes, there are another 39 classes to choose from at our conference. We encourage you to visit our website, cnyc.coop, and review the brochure. And now on to tonight's program. Please enter any questions you might have into the Q&A, and our speakers will either cover them as they go or at the end of their presentations as part of a larger Q&A. Now over to you, Peter, to discuss Local Law 88 and how it fits into Local Law 97.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, for that introduction. It's quite a lot to state to start us off, but I really appreciate it. So I'm going to share my screen initially and get us going. We're calling this the Local 88 and 97 countdown, right? Don't be caught by unexpected late filing, fines, and penalties. So Local 88 I'm going to focus on, and Tom's going to kind of shift on to Local 97. So 88 has been around for a while. Well, before I got, you all should know me by now, hopefully. Peter Varsalona, I'm Principal and Vice President at RAND. RAND's been in the industry for a long time. We administer about 60 million in construction annually, and we do all kinds of engineering and architecture related stuff. So, agenda, right? Overview of 88, of Local 88, 132 and 134. So, why 3, right, as it pertains to lighting and submetering? Well, we're going to talk a little bit about that and how the law has changed, right? Local 88 was instituted in 2009. So the City Council gave owners about 15 years or so to comply. It was modified in 2016 to change certain definitions, and I'll go over that as well. We're going to talk a little bit about compliance deadlines, the fines and penalties, of course, because if it's a local law, there has to be a fine or penalty, even though we don't like those. What are actionable steps for compliance for Local 88, right? Lighting and submetering upgrades specifically. What to do when you're working with a registered design professional associated with these programs. You should really not be doing these solo. You should be bringing somebody in with expertise. We'll talk a little about the compliance timeline thereafter. So, introduction to Local 88. So I'm going to stop the share in this presentation, and I'm going to pull up the actual laws so we can just talk quickly about what they are, right? Just starting, like, we should know exactly what the laws entail and what and how they've been modified. So let me just get this set up. All right. So Local 88 was instituted, as I said, in 2009. So, you know, it covered basically, and the reason why I wanted to bring it up is what was the intent of it, right? It was the council found that, says right in the beginning, that non-residential lighting was responsible for about 18% of the energy used in New York City buildings and roughly 18% of carbon emissions from buildings. So back in 2009, they're very concerned about lighting systems. Their focus was in many large non-residential buildings, but nevertheless, it was still something that would cover residential buildings, had to be considered. It covered 50,000 square foot, right, buildings that had to comply with Local Law 87, because remember this was part of the 84 to 87, those individual local laws, right? 84 is the annual benchmarking, 87 is the 10-year energy audit retro commissioning plans, 88 is lighting and submetering. Again, issued in 2009, it said, hey, you had to comply by January 1 of 2025. So again, many owners weren't focused on it. A couple of big exclusions were residential units. Okay, so again, residential homeowners, cooperators aren't really that concerned about it at that time. And one of the things that the other part of it is the commercial tenants. You had to be a pretty large tenant, right? It had to be 10,000 square feet. Okay, and it basically modified Article 310, the required upgrade of lighting systems. Article 310 is actually in the maintenance code, maintenance of buildings section of the code. It's chapter 3, and again, it went over it. All these latest round of local laws where you're required to do like gas piping inspections and things of that nature are located in this section of the code. Now, at the time, covered buildings was 50,000 square feet, and It gave, the definition of upgrade, right, was lighting system of a covered building. But if you notice, it always said lighting controls, right? And I think that's what confused a lot of owners, right? A lot of owners don't realize it. Like over time, just by virtue of complying with Local 87, low-hanging fruit type upgrade items, lighting replacements with LEDs, were often done, and many buildings have already done that. But they missed this part of it, right? They weren't focused on the lighting controls, which we'll talk a little bit about this evening. I'm going to stop the share on that. Okay. And then I'm going to share another local law. And this is 132 of 2016. All right. Now, this one talks specifically about the sub-meters. Now, for whatever reason, they decided, the City Council in its infinite wisdom decided to break the update, the 2016 update, into two, 132 and 134. 132 focused on the sub-metering of tenant spaces, and 134 on the lighting. The main issue is that a covered building, the definition of a covered building changed, right? It lowered it down to any buildings over 25,000 square feet. So local law, if you notice, Local 97, which Tom will be talking about, it covers all buildings over 25,000 square feet, right? So up until, at the very beginning, benchmarking again was also, again, buildings that were much bigger. Benchmarking changed to 25,000. Local 97 is 25,000. So they had same thing here. This was again in 2016. They were lowering that covered building size to 25,000. So it made more buildings now have to comply with the lighting and sub-metering requirements of Local 88. It always had the same exceptions, right? In this case, it accepted residential units, meaning dwelling units, are not included. Of course, if you're in a multiple dwelling and you have retail and commercial spaces, they have to comply. Non-occupiable or residential spaces within a multiple dwelling, like storage rooms, boiler rooms, and that kind of thing, they had to comply. Fire stairs, all those had to comply. It's just that dwelling units, the work inside dwelling units, were excluded. Religious institutions were also excluded. But essentially, it also lowered the sub-metering of tenant spaces. It changed that from 10,000 to 5,000. So again, it made much more commercial retail spaces have to comply and be sub-metered. Okay, so that was these changes are reflected in these local laws. By the way, these local laws are available online. You can easily download them. So I'm going to stop that one, and I'm going to go to one more, which is the 134. And let me share that one. Okay, so hopefully you all can see this one. Now 134 talked about the lighting, right? Obviously had the same covered building definition. It had the same exceptions. But what I wanted, the upgrade definition was very, very clear cut. It includes all lighting controls, interior lighting controls, lighting reduction controls, and automatic lighting shutoff, tandem wiring, exit signs, interior lighting power requirements, and exterior lighting. So it really tried to encompass everything, all the lights and light controls associated with these buildings. And again, it kept the same January 1, 2025. So if you were a building that was, greater than 25, less than 50,000, but greater than 25,000 square feet in size, you now had to comply, and you basically had 9 years, right? This is 2016 to do so. It gave the same exceptions, right? One exception, and this is all the way through, is that, hey, if you upgraded your lighting system to some standard after 2010, again, remember the initial law was 2009. So if you had just done lighting upgrades back at that time, as long as it complied with the latest energy code, you wouldn't have to do upgrading. Of course, lighting systems in dwelling units inside of apartments are excluded. The same thing with the exclusion with the houses of worship. Okay, so they split up the two local laws, but that's why the three represent, we just say Local 88 to talk about the issue, but these three all work in tandem. Okay, so I'm going to pull up the main presentation slides now. Again, what needs upgrading? Residential buildings, common areas like lobbies and hallways, basements, those type of spaces in these buildings. Non-residential buildings, of course, include all areas, right? Offices, retail spaces. So the main thing that we wanted, the specific actions, right? LED lights, lighting control systems, right? They include dimmers, occupancy sensors, daylight harvesting systems, automatic shutdowns, vacancy controls, that kind of thing. Upgrading exit signs, right? Exit signs can't consume more than 5 watts. Who must comply? Again, not for sub-metering, non-residential spaces greater than 5,000 square feet. Individual or shared sub-meters could comply. Monthly statements have to be sent to those tenants that show their energy usage. And most of our buildings that we find, most places are sub-metered. You do find occasionally group medical facilities that may have multiple tenants that require sub-metering that may be shared on a common meter, or perhaps maybe there'll be a sponsor that still owns a large section of the commercial condo section, or other areas that are that have that they may be on a common meter, that now have to be separated out. If you're a co-op that owns those spaces, you have to make sure that these areas, one, have sub-meters for each of the tenant spaces, and that they have lighting that's in compliance. Yeah, if you haven't done so already and you're behind the times, you got to inspect these areas right now. These things can be inspected by, at least initially, by your superintendent or your manager, just to get a sense of where you stand if you don't know. But you should be able, more than likely you're already sub-metered, but the lighting, you really need to check it and see where you stand. There's probably a variance of lights that have been upgraded. Some may just be simply the light bulbs were changed. I suspect that if you haven't done lighting controls, which is majority of the buildings that we cover, they just didn't do that, and now they're trying to race to catch up to comply. So on these jobs, there's no filing requirement to do the plans, to send it out to bid and all that your registered design professional can do. You can do a plan, which is what Rand likes to do, and this is just a partial plan from a job. But you could also do a table or chart, right, which lists all of the light fixtures on a particular level, what type they are, what the lighting power is, how they're controlled, and then what kind of upgrading is needed if necessary. Like on a plan like this, you'll notice there's all kinds of lights shown. There's panels, there's wireways, there's occupancy sensors. Right now we have them all labeled out. They have these keynotes that's applied to it. So your professional can put together a plan of the floors that are retail or commercial in your building. They can also cover residential components that are non-dwelling unit, but basements that are used by that are used for storage or other uses. And they can, again, you flag all the lights, figure out which ones have to be changed out, which ones just simply need new bulbing, and which ones might actually need some type of lighting control system to comply with the 2020 New York City Energy Code, right? That's the latest code. So you could have all kinds of things incorporated with that. On this particular plan, this is a building that not only did we have to provide sub-meters, we tend to specify quad logic. There are many different types of meters. We specify, for this particular tenant, we put a sub-meter onto their panel. We have wireways that go, to different equipment. We have occupancy sensors that control lights in each different section. So there's a fair amount of work here to get into compliance. So it's, you have to be done by December 31st of this year. Report has to be filed by May 1 of next year. This is new, right? So we don't even know, let's say you finish the work in February, is the DOB going to catch you, issue a violation because you didn't do the work by December 31st? No one knows, right? We understand that they're going to get the report, the licensed design professional or an electrician, right? The regulation does allow electricians to file these reports by May 1. That will, indicate compliance or not. And that may be, if you don't comply, that's when you get a violation. Like that's what we expect. Could an inspector go to your building and say, hey, you haven't, done this work by this date? It could happen, but I just don't think the city is prepared to send a fleet of inspectors January 1 to see if you haven't fully complied. I think they're going to look for you to submit those reports, right? They want the work done. Whenever I've gone to city meetings, they always talk about, no, their focus really is on getting compliance, not so much fines. So I don't think I mean, Local 80 is a one-time deal, right? It's not an annual, it's a one-time filing. They want you to comply with the regulation. Obviously, if you haven't complied by now, you're behind the boat, right? You didn't start 15 years ago or 9 years ago, depending on when you had to actually comply. So you're under the gun a little bit. You can still get a lot of work done in the next few months to comply. Again, there doesn't have to be a formal plan. It can be a simple thing as a chart listing the work that's needed on each floor, comparing, what's the lighting power, that you have compared to what's allowed by code. The code has specific lighting demand weights for each type of use. Your consultant will calculate that for you, will determine based on your square footage and the type of uses you have, what your lighting power needs are, or what's maximum, and then you can show compliance. In this particular case, we got calculated all the lights, the total lighting power. We show that it complies. And again, a lot of things are just changing out bulbs, right? Getting rid of your fluorescents, putting in LEDs, getting conversion kits. But there are going to be times when you have lights that just are not conducive to LEDs. You're going to have to switch them out. Meaning you have to put a new fixture in. In some cases, we're finding out that some of the older lights are not conducive to dimming controls, and if they're non-dimmable, you have no choice. You have to switch them out, and that could be an unexpected charge that you weren't planning for. So what are some of the penalties for non-compliance? Again, we always mention there's always penalties with New York City and their local laws. If you don't submit a lighting upgrade compliance report, it's $1,500 for each year that you haven't submitted it. And then also submitting a report for the installation of sub-meters. So you're like, well, P, why is there 2 reports? Because we do think there's going to be 2 reports that need to be filed, one for lighting, one for sub-meters, that coincide with the 2 different local laws that were issued in 2016. DOB might change it. They may have one single report. We don't have a form of report yet, so we don't know. I'm sure the DOB will eventually provide a form that we'll have to submit with any other documentation that you'll have to provide. Also $1,500 a year with additional penalty of $500 per tenant space for failure to install sub-meters. Key is you got to get your compliance check-in well in advance of January 1. Well, we're already September 19th, so we're not quite well in advance anymore. But the hope is that you'll be able to move forward as quickly as you can in determining what your requirements are. And if many owners have done work already, they have sub-meters, they have lights that are on LEDs, but they may not have the lighting control aspects done, and that's something that you'll need to check. We have this nice little step-by-step actionable steps for lighting upgrades, right? 1, assess your energy consumption across your building, develop this upgrade plan, right, to show transition to LEDs if you haven't done so already. Upgrading the exit signs, right? A lot of times exit signs are old, they're not addressed. You want to make sure that those are included in the program. Installing smart controls, right? These are vacancy sensors and other types of controls that regulate when lights turn on and off, when they're not, when there's no occupancy. Check for exemptions, right? There are some exemptions, like I mentioned, that if you have a religious institution that's in the space, they're exempt. Sub-metering, key, most of your buildings probably have sub-metering by now, but if they don't, you don't have to necessarily upgrade the whole infrastructure to accommodate that. And I know that can be a fear of some owners where, oh wow, I have too many linked uses on a how do I separate it? Well, you can sub-meter at the local panel. You don't have to upgrade individual risers and panels for each type of tenant space. The key is that you got to be able to sub-meter dedicated tenant spaces and give them a bill that shows, right, what their consumption is. And you can do that with individual sub-meters. If a tenant has multiple panels, they can all be sub-metered. They can all be, collected, and you can come up with a billing function or a statement for them, a monthly statement for them to see what their use is. And as I mentioned before, you really do want to engage a consultant. One is, well, you can say, well, Pete, you have to, right? The resident design professional has to file it. But with Local 88, you can have a licensed electrician who could also submit that affidavit by May 1 of next year. We mentioned some of the exemptions already, dwelling units, and some other lighting elements that may have been upgraded post 2010. Again, those type of things are in effect, and certainly it's helpful not, obviously not having apartments included in the upgrading program. Submeters exemptions apply to small buildings that are not more than 3 stories tall. Again, these are all in the actual regulation itself. What are some of the occupancy sensors, right? Some are, passive infrared type. These detect changes in temperature in a room, so the sensor knows when to turn the lights on. Ultrasonic, type that, sense when someone is actually in the room. It bounces waves off and see if it detects any kind of frequency shift, and that is good at really kind of detecting minor motion. So those can be, pretty accurate. Dual technology type that use both, and both can within it says here both technologies within a sensor must detect someone in the room, right, in order to turn on the lights. But one must kind of continually sense in order for the lights to stay on, right? So they're a much more sophisticated way to determine occupancy. Technologies have, again, for different types of use and different types of motion that's expected in spaces. So, all 3 are good for major motion, someone, actual walking within a space. Minor motion, you tend to be better using an ultrasonic or dual. Fine motion, like small, like turning a page or something really minor, you want to use an ultrasonic or dual. And then, of course, for very fine motion, it gets to be, somewhat difficult. I know even in my office where we may have people on a floor that are really quiet, lights suddenly shut down after 15 minutes, and they got to stand up and, turns back on again. So sometimes the sensitivity has to be adjusted. So you got to be careful with very fine motion. And then, of course, the lights stay on when the room is unoccupied. Again, dual technology is very good for that purpose. Occupancy versus vacancy sensors. Well, occupancy sensors are automatically turn the lights on when you enter a room and off when you leave, right? So it's very easy, convenient. You don't have to touch anything. Everything's set up, pretty basic. Vacancy sensor, though, also turns the lights off when you leave a room. So if you need to manually turn them on when you walk into a room, you can do so. Vacancy sensors, they maximize the energy savings from the sensor because it's not always necessary to turn the lights when you walk into a room. So these are another type of sensor that's very effective. Some examples, in a lot of commercial entities, open offices, private offices, lobbies, things of that nature. On residences, bathrooms, kitchens, laundry rooms, areas that maybe not well, are occupied very infrequently. Types, you'll see wall mounted, you'll see ceiling mounted. These are kind of just some examples of what they look like. But they're very commercially available. When you work with a registered design professional, it's one of the things that we said in the course syllabus is that, hey, what does that person do, right? They're going to be certifying the lighting upgrade and emissions compliance, which Tom will talk about in 97. And they're going to ensure that you meet the energy code requirements, right? It's really a burden. Don't expect your property manager or your superintendent or heck, even your licensed electrician to know these things, right? That's what the registered design professional is for. That's what they're involved with, to make sure that you meet all of those provisions of code. They can also craft your RFP for bidding purposes to tailor it to the compliance requirements of your building. Steps for building owners, clear contracts, make it clearly cut what the design professional is actually going to be doing, to outline compliance. Review that scope of work in a timeline, right? You don't have a lot of time. You got to get moving on it, and then have them. Don't make sure that the professional submits things, right? Sometimes contracts are written where they'll do the work, but they leave it on others to submit the report. I think it's good to have this design professional submit everything, get you the confirmation that everything is fully complied with. So what are the essentials, right? That this should be in every proposal from a registered design professional, right? They should be reviewing the floor plans, electrical system plans, any historical upgrades that have been done, your current tenant list information. Coordinate field visits to conduct visual observations of existing lighting and electrical system conditions and configurations. Review covered tenancy conditions at each floor to ascertain total lighting power and submetering requirements. Have them prepare a report addressing compliance review of the lighting systems and submeter installations, right? We comply, we don't, this is what we need to do. Report should be ultimately, a report's going to need to be in a form and manner determined by DOB. Now, this is that item that's a kind of an asterisk, right? No one really knows what that form is yet. So you really are under the gun. You got to bring a registered design professional in, but just know that they're probably going to charge you for some form of report subsequent to your repair program when this actual, when the DOB issues what form of report is necessary. Report should include all the information in the adoption of final rule that's dated December 14th, and it's another document that's available online. And then, of course, it should delineate very clearly what doesn't comply and what corrective work recommendations are needed. We see fees around, they range. I see fees, some as low as $2,500. I mean, you should expect a fee range for these services through somewhere in the $3,000 to $7,000 range, right? You can hire someone for $2,500, but it's not going to get you where you need to be. Ultimately, you're going to have to do an RFP. There's going to undoubtedly be corrective work. There may even be some fees associated with, construction observation of corrective work. So you should expect give yourself a little bit higher range to incorporate these services. Compliance timeline. Now, right? We're already too late, right? Now to December. You only have till December to actually complete the lighting upgrades, right? All the controls, the sub-meters, everything has to be done by December 31. So if we haven't done so, we got to try to do so as quickly as we can. If your building block number ends with number 4, this is a side note, your 87 is due. 87s are the energy audits. I know we're not talking about it today, but it's something that's due every 10 years. By May 1, right, we got to submit, as always, our annual benchmarking report. We have our 88 report now. And of course, your first 87 emissions report will be due as well. So May 1 is a kind of a big important date to remember. That's when the reporting requirement is due. And we expect a lot of owners, right? Only about 11% of owners didn't comply with 97 in this first wave. So a lot of owners are going to be preparing for that big 2030 hit by looking at carbon reduction goals, which Tom will be focusing on. And that's what I got. So, questions?
We have one question in the we have one question in the Q&A. It's regarding submetering. It says, I don't understand the purpose of residential submetering. So do you want to briefly explain how that works?
Absolutely. So most apartments are sub-metered. The regulation doesn't pertain to the sub-metering of residential units. It talks about the sub-metering of commercial or retail spaces within that multiple dwelling or within a commercial building, right? So it's all commercial buildings and tenants that are in multiple dwellings that are, commercial tenant spaces that are over 5,000 square feet in size have to be sub-metered. Now, more than likely, those spaces are already sub-metered, but if they're not, they need to have, they need to be, it's a shared medical office or a space that has many different commercial tenants within it, but they're paying as part of their lease or rent a surcharge for electric usage. That has to stop. It has to be individual metered. So every tenant is responsible for its own power usage. What we know, and there's a lot of research on it, and it's the same thing with residences as well, that when you make owners responsible or tenants responsible for their electrical usage and the electrical bill, they undoubtedly conserve by a huge margin. So the impetus is there to sub-meter, right? We're trying to reduce the amount of electrical energy that's being used and consumed, right? That all leads to carbon emissions. The utility has to generate a lot for the power that it provides. They're burning fossil fuels, and they're obviously they're moving towards a more towards renewables, but they're a ways away. So we got to just reduce our power, and this is one way to do it. I hope I answered the question.
Yeah, thank you. Are lights with dimming required? We have plenty of LED lights without dimming, and motion detection would seem to be most appropriate and all that's necessary for energy savings.
Right. So there are certain mandatory provisions in the energy code, and the key is the occupancy sensors can be on off. and you can do dimming. Dimming is only necessary for or mandatory for new building construction. So the code actually says it very clearly. The energy code has a whole section on it. It's C4. I'll read it. C405.2 lists all the lighting controls. It's in the 2020. It's the 2020 code. One of the things that what I can do is let's see if I can find it here. All right, I'm going to share my screen because I think it's a really good resource if you haven't used it. And it's from the DOB, and it's from, if you go on the DOB, New York City Department of Buildings website under codes and sustainability, it has a lot of the local laws that we're talking about. But inside, it has the articles, but it also has a link to the New York City Energy Code, right? And and if you take this link, it'll take you to the sections you can find. Now, the lighting control section is a large section. It's like 20, 25 pages. Again, it's something that your registered design professional is best to look at and see how it applies to your building. There are work items that may be optional that you want to actually incorporate. Right, in some cases, I've had clients where they want to put in the 50% dimmable lights in the in addition to the dual set 50% dimmable inside the exit stairs, rather than just on off. But again, it's those are decisions you make in concert with your designer. Also, it's nice in here. It has I love the FAQs that they have at the links. So there's a lot of good questions that they have there that you can look at, and you can see some of the responses that the DOB has put forward. So this is, again, another good, useful resource, and it has all kinds of good information on all the different local laws that your co-ops and condos and other building owners are now faced with.
And when we send out the slides, I'll add a page with the links to all of the relevant rules and laws, etc. So you can just click on it. Do these rules apply to smaller co-ops under 15,000 square feet?
That's easy. No, they don't. You have to be over 25,000 square feet, so you're good.
Nice, happy question for you.
Absolutely.
If a co-op has no commercial tenants, is it still required to do? It says it's still required. I don't know if that.
Yes, all residential buildings over 25,000 must comply, must submit a report. And remember, all the common areas, lobby, corridors, fire stairs, boiler rooms, storage rooms in your basement have to be evaluated and must comply.
What is the overall percent of sub-metering updates that can be? I'm not sure I understand the question. What is the overall percentage of sub-metering updates that can be used maybe to pass for local law 9788? I'm not sure.
I'm not sure.
If you want to email me, we'll get an answer to you from Peter. Okay. Does the RDP provide vendors for this? Does the RDP provide vendors to use for the smart controls and dimmers? And would the RDP give an estimate cost for the smart controls when you do the proposal?
I think they should. I think they should give you a scope and budget framework on what to, because they're going to be the ones spelling out exactly the work items. They'll be the ones also specifying the product, so they'll have a good handle on what those costs are. They may even have connections to lighting suppliers where you can directly purchase the lights and the controls for installation by your electrician. And some owners prefer turnkey, where the electrician is actually purchasing the equipment they're installing as well. But they'll probably mark it up a little bit. So that's just something to think about and discuss if it's worthwhile, depending on how much work you actually have to do. If you have a lot of lights to put in, it might be beneficial for you to work with that lighting, supplier directly to get the lights and the bulbs and stuff like that. I'm not sure. Oh, the other one was, but the actual licensed design professional isn't the installer typically, right? They're usually a licensed PE or RA, professional engineer or registered architect who is providing consulting. They're usually not affiliated with a contractor. They may recommend some contractors to bid the job too, but you can get contractors, licensed electricians from your managing agent. I'm sure they've worked in your building before, so you may have other contacts who are doing this work.
If a co-op has 360 units, do all of the lighting things have to be replaced in order not to get a fine? And I mean, it's not required in units. Do you want to?
Right. Yeah, it's not. That's one of the carve outs that no work in apartments is required. So in that particular building, there's obviously a lot of units. It may be a fairly large building. All the common areas, lobbies, basement space, storage rooms, those all have to be evaluated. Those will probably require some from, if they haven't done so already, LED lights. They're going to need controls for different spaces, occupancy sensors, things of that nature will need to be incorporated into the scope.
If a basement area is only used for storage, and can it still just use on-off switches, or is that no
It's no,
longer compliant?
you need occupancy sensors. Yeah, it's not compliant.
Beyond submetering and motion detection sensors, as well as dimming, are there other means to reduce lighting energy usage?
Oh yeah, the energy code goes through a whole litany of different requirements. Right? Let's say exterior lights, daylight harvesting if you have certain types of skylights. Like there's all kinds of things that you can consider with regard to your lighting systems in buildings. It all depends on what you have. And I do recommend strongly that you bring in that's what your registered design professional can survey what you have. They can offer recommendations on how to reduce your lighting demand, but also your output. Lighting is a significant energy user. Most owners have already incorporated some, but a lot of still have just on-off controls, and this is an opportunity to gain savings over time.
For the emergency lights, what is the limit that the lights can consume? I think you said 5.
5 watt exit lights, it's no more than 5 watts. Yeah.
Is there a separate thing for, I guess, the emergency lights run on battery? They would be required to be regular lighting, right?
They're on battery. Yeah, those are usually not encompassed in the in local 88. There are energy code requirements pertaining to those for new buildings and new construction, but those have backup batteries or emergency power systems that feed those.
Are occupancy or vacancy sensors required for residential hallways? The tenants disapprove.
Well, this is one that's again really difficult for a professional engineer to say, yeah, after 15 minutes the lights should shut down, especially if they feed the path of egress, right? But the answer is yes. The hallways are supposed to be shut down. They can be on. You can put them on 50% dimming capability, so you get some lights. Remember, there's supposed to be some minimum illumination, right? It's I think it's 2-foot candles, of minimum illumination throughout the hallway, which by the way is not a heck of a lot. But again, those spaces are regulated. You do have to conform.
Is the square foot per building or overall? We have 4 separate buildings. Each building is 6 stories. My building too. Peter, do you want to quickly explain covered building list?
Yeah, so again, you're more than likely you're over 25,000 square feet collectively, and the covered, the building list gives the definition. You don't get to say, well, my one building, each building is less than what required, so I get away with it. No, you have to. It's a collective entity. You have to add up all the square footage.
And we'll attach a link to the covered building list. We have that, so you can look yourself up. We have a question coming up for you, Thomas, next regarding submetering gas. So we're going to hold that till the end of your presentation. If there are separate storage spaces that only are occasionally used for short times, can we have an on-off switch as long as the bulbs are LED and the hallways are on movement sensors?
From that example, it sounds like no. I mean, if you have a storage room, it's got to have an occupancy sensor, right? You can't have it where no movement is going on for more than 15 minutes and the lights stay on, right? You gotta, and someone forgets. The idea is that let's say you forget to turn the light off, when someone leaves, it's staying on. So you gotta have something that shuts it off.
Are there grants available to help pay for this compliance? Are there still rebates for lighting, or did they yank those? They said they were.
I don't think there are. I'm not aware of them. At least at this stage, I don't. It's still late in the game. I don't think there are. But
yeah, Emily, you can email me and I'll try and see whatever I can find, but probably not. Okay. Can stairwells always be on? I think you sort of already answered
yes,
that, but
they can. Yeah.
So it's just the hallways.
Yeah, just the hallways. Yeah.
Okay. Last one. For clarity, must a large building without submetering of residential components convert all residential units to submetering? No.
Well, yeah, it's not mandatory, but again, it's a good thing to look at. It's a lot of savings ultimately when it's passed on to individual shareholders or residents having to pay their own bills. They will conserve.
And we might try and do a separate class on that because if people are electrifying with items that get plugged into their apartment and they're paying then the rate that's the residential rate as opposed to the building wide rate, it's more expensive. And you can also negotiate with PSC if you change over. So maybe we'll do that's, I think, a whole separate topic. Anyway, okay. So live, that's the last question. Thank you so much.
Of course.
And any other questions, please email them to me and I'll get them to Peter for you unless we have extra time at the end of Thomas, but I don't know.
Hey, Peter, I do have a question for you. If a tenant space has a Con Ed meter, does that count towards submetering?
So yeah, it does. It's a metered. It's something that is individually metered. Now, if that Con Ed meter is covering like 5 separate tenant spaces, then no, right? But if it's one tenant, it's dedicated for that specific tenant use, it conforms.
I'm sorry, but one last question, Peter, before I let you mute out. Our stairwells are open to each floor. They're not separated by walls or other egress. Does this make a difference in terms of where we have to put on dimming?
So there's lots of older buildings that have maybe an open stair, open main egress stair. So I differentiate the lights that are within the stair itself versus the hallway that connects to it. So inside that stair area, those lights do not have to be put on an occupancy sensor. It's only required for new buildings. For the hallways, though, those need to be.
Thank you. All right. Thomas, do you want to on to local law 97?
Yep. And thank you, Peter, for the excellent presentation on local law 88. And Rebecca, thank you for the warm introduction. And thank you, folks, for taking the time to hear about local law 97. And I think this boot camp is an excellent, refresher course. We have, as we know, local law 97 and local law 88, come and due very much immediately. So this is a very timely topic. A little bit about NPower Group. We are an engineering design firm focused on implementing energy efficiency and decarbonization solutions. We have a strong presence in the New York City market, and we have been around for the last 20 years. We offer a range of engineering design, implementation, energy consulting, and compliance, as well as on-site renewable generation. So today we're going to really be talking about local law 97, compliance for Article 321, how to calculate your emissions correctly, what goes into those emissions limits, and talking a little bit about some of the good faith efforts if your building is subject to penalties during the first compliance period. And of course, leaving some time for some Q&A at the end. So I think most of the folks on this call are already familiar with local law 97, but I will just kind of briefly talk about what is local law 97. So local law 97 sets carbon emissions limits for buildings that are 25,000 square feet or more. And there are covered buildings, which Peter had touched base on. As Peter mentioned, about 11%, a small percentage of those buildings will be subject to fines for the 2024 energy usage period. So that means most of the folks on this call probably will not see fines during the first compliance period. However, a majority of buildings starting in 2030 will have fines. So, it's really prudent now to be understanding where your buildings are at. and how to really prepare for local law 97 carbon emissions penalties when they come due. And really, it starts with the energy benchmarking data. So we've been benchmarking buildings since the first compliance year was 2011, and so most buildings are very familiar with that process because of the letter grades that were enacted a few years ago. So the benchmarking data has really become near and dear to a lot of co-ops' hearts, especially when you have D's and C's letter grades. So I think a lot of folks are already really familiar with the impacts of the energy benchmarking. And as it comes down to local law 97, it's really important to really verify and understand your local law 84 benchmarking data. And understanding what goes into that data. So so everyone understands here, the data is for your energy usage is provided by the utility companies, typically Con Ed and National Grid, and then you self-report for any fuel oil that you burn. Water from the DEP is also directly reported by the utility company. Water, though, does not impact your letter grade, nor does it impact your local law 97 carbon emissions. So when, with the multifamily buildings, oftentimes with tenants there, sometimes you have direct metered residents who are not sub-metered, but direct metered by Con Ed. The visibility into your energy data is not always known. So we start with looking at, what data is known, your common area, your PLP accounts, and any master metered accounts, understanding, historical trends. So if, you have anomalies, it's important to really look over, your data with your benchmarking provider. The data is actually publicly available up to the last year. So you can actually see on like the New York City accelerator, and there's a New York City local law 97 calculator. You can see the trends over time of where your building has been performing. And, when there are anomalies, that's something that, especially in the more recent year, whether it's a sharp drop or a big increase, those are things you want to start to really investigate a lot more. So, beyond the benchmarking data, it's really important, the other side of the benchmarking is your building, area and the type of occupancy within the building. So typically, you obviously have your multifamily space of the building, but any building with commercial tenants will have various occupancy classifications for those areas. So understanding, how much area is related to the residential portion of the building and how much the commercial, and the different space types, is really important for local law 97, because there are different, emissions limits depending on the, space area. Another important element of, local law 97 and preparing is, conducting an emissions impact assessment. So understanding where and how much penalties you may be receiving under local law 97, based on your current usage. And then, using that as a starting point to identify ways to, reduce your energy, reduce your carbon, and especially reducing, your operating expenses, which is really the most important thing, that, co-ops and condos are facing, is trying to at least, manage, maintain, and even reduce your maintenance costs. So a lot of the goals that, local law 97 is trying to achieve can also help to, manage and reduce your maintenance costs with lower energy usage. And, all buildings are different. And so there may be different pathways for buildings to, achieve compliance with local law 97 and reduce and eliminate their fines. So it's important to evaluate what those paths are. And then, for the majority of buildings that don't, have penalties starting this year, looking at the next 4 to 5 years is an opportunity to implement those, energy and carbon reduction projects. So, this may be applicable to some or all of the folks that are on here. It may not be applicable to any of the building or any of the folks that are on this call, but there are alternate pathways for buildings that have 35% rent regulated, affordable housing, and income restricted properties. So those buildings are specifically called out in the law. There is a list of these buildings, which we'll get to in a sec, where you can determine if you are on that list. And there are two basic pathways. So one is to implement what they call the prescriptive path, and so you have 13 different energy conservation measures that have to be implemented. Those actually are all really good measures that all buildings should implement. And then the alternative is to meet the emissions limits for the 2030 to 2034 compliance cycle, which, again, as I mentioned, the majority of buildings at their current energy usage actually will have fines during that compliance cycle. So, typically in many cases, the prescriptive pathway, implementing those 13 measures is going to be the easiest and cleanest and most cost-effective way to comply if your building is subject under Section 28, Article 321. So, the city has published lists for all buildings that are all covered buildings that have to comply with Local Law 97. And as we see, that starts at 25,000 square feet. They also have specific lists for Article 321 buildings. So if you are on that list, and if you your building has a lot of sponsor units, and you have a high percentage of rent regulated building or rent regulated apartments, see and confirm that you are on that list. And if you think there's an error, then that's something that is important to go and make sure that the DOB has an updated and corrected accounting of how many rent regulated units your building has. And again, it's a 35% is the threshold for that. So when we talk about, your emissions limit, what goes into the calculation? So it's really twofold. It's, how much energy your building consumes and carbon. So, typically buildings here are using electricity, natural gas, fuel oil, and steam. And all of those sources of energy right now have a carbon emissions attributed to them. So, it's everything, every, kilowatt hour and therm that you use goes into your total emissions. And so that's why looking at your historic benchmarking data is a good starting point to know, how close you are or not to having, potential penalties this year. And so as we, first bullet point, this year counts. The first compliance period starts in 2024. So your energy usage from January 1 of this year to December 31st will count toward your first Local Law 97 report. So that report's expected to be filed on May 1st of 2025 for the previous calendar year, similar to how benchmarking has been done. Knowing that, the emissions limits and Local Law 97 and penalties are coming up, taking advantage of, the low hanging fruit, the easy energy conservation measures that should be implemented. Like every building should have, LED lighting. If you're building for example, is on a dual fuel. Another one of those things is to, make sure that you're burning gas and try not to burn oil just because you have oil sitting in your tank. Only use that if you are, forced to on an interruptible day. And remember, the natural gas is about 70% of, the emissions are 70% of oil 2 and 4. So converting, if you are an oil customer, you should look to convert to natural gas, especially now, in Con Ed, they're going, we expect they're going to start to limit the amount of new connections. So if you are an interruptible or an oil customer, looking to convert your building to gas, is a really good way to just cut down on your emissions. And natural gas, from a heating perspective, is almost half the cost to heat your building. So it's a really good investment if your building is not already there. And, Peter had mentioned local law 87. We have compliance due at the end of the year for buildings with block numbers due in 2024. So, retro commissioning measures are things that buildings, really have to implement. So we strongly recommend, implementing all those retro commissioning measures. And to the local law 87 point, you can do the local law 87 assessment up to 4 years prior to the due date. So these local law 87 reports are investment grade energy audits, and there's a retro commissioning component. So it's a great opportunity, to kind of kill two birds with one stone. We strongly recommend evaluating, what opportunities are at your building. So the best way that gets done is with an investment grade energy audit. And, folks like Rand and Empowered now are putting on, the local law 97 lens. So, when we do our audits, we are looking at things both from an energy savings perspective and a carbon perspective. So, engaging, a registered design professional to do that audit in advance is a really important thing. And, lastly, as it relates to your, the first reporting is your previous energy data that was submitted under local law 84. So, taking a look at the actual data that was submitted to portfolio manager, asking, your benchmarking provider to share with you what all the inputs are, having them share with you the Con Ed data that was provided, comparing that Con Ed data to bills that you have, those common area and PL&P and maybe master metered accounts, so that you're ensuring that the data is aligned with the reality at the building. And this year is a good example where Con Ed had estimated data for us. We do a lot of benchmarking. We had, I would say, a majority of our buildings, maybe over 50%, had estimated data from Con Ed, which meant we had to review that data and then resubmit that data on August 1st. So, Con Ed is an imperfect organization, and they do make mistakes, especially when you have, multiple buildings on the same block, and, service addresses sometimes get confused with your neighbors. So, looking at that data and working with your benchmarking provider, especially when you have, those lower Energy Star scores and you have that D, or, you're facing high penalties, the first place to do is looking at your data. So the other side of, your emissions limits, it's how much energy you use and how large your building is. So the local law 97, they define gross floor area as effectively the total area inside of the exterior walls. And this is including all area, all your, common area, mechanical spaces, but most importantly, your, above and below grade area. When we look at the DOB and DOF records, a lot of those measurements do not include some of the subterranean spaces, some of the mechanical spaces. So buildings are often, represent and have a lower gross floor area than what's actually within the building. So, and that goes back to, when the buildings were built, when they were filed, many buildings are 100 years old, and how the calculations were done. And, oftentimes folks were, submitting lower areas for tax purposes and things like that. So, it's really important to look at, your floor area, because that affects, how much emissions limits you're allowed to have. So, the more floor area that you have, the more emissions you are allowed to have. Or alternatively, if you have more floor area and your energy usage is the same, your potential carbon penalties are less. Then the other we make note about the gross floor area is not always what's in the Department of Finance, since they miss, like we were saying in the last slide, the basements and mechanical spaces. And so it's really important to look at that. And then, we're allowed within the, system to include any area of any building type or space type above 5,000 feet. So it typically, a lot of co-ops and condos have commercial spaces. So if you have, say 10,000 feet of commercial space, 5,000 of that might be a restaurant. Another 5,000 feet of that might be a bank or a financial institution. We're allowed to include those areas separately in the filing, and each of those areas has a different emissions limit. So, some areas like restaurants have a higher emissions limit on a per square foot basis than, say, a multifamily area. So it is beneficial to really accurately report how much the different areas of your building contribute to your overall gross floor area. So yeah, this is a good example too. We have various space types. So you have retail stores, you have grocery stores, a number of different items that can be, within your building. So it's really important to document the different space types that you have. And, that all leads to, performing a building area measurement survey, again, by a registered design professional. That's, I think someone asked the question, but that's really professional engineers and registered architects. And so what they do is they go into the buildings, they measure the buildings by the way that, local law 97 requires. So looking at those exterior walls, including all that above and below grade space, and then looking at all of the different space types. So, we have some buildings that have, 20 different, retail spaces. So we'll go in there and measure each space, categorize each space by it's a retail store, a grocery store, a laundromat, et cetera, et cetera. Those all, have different limits. And, so when we go and do that reporting for local law 97 compliance, we're most accurately doing that filing. And so what happens if you don't do a building area measurement? So we then, if we are the ones that are submitting your data, we have to go with what we know. So typically that might mean if we don't know, if we didn't perform a building area measurement, we'll rely on the DOB and DOF records for the building and the different space types. And that may not accurately reflect what's going on. So, right now is a great time to engage folks to, perform that area measurement. And it's a one-time survey. That survey has to be, stamped, approved by, either an architect or an engineer. And then that will help support when you do that local law 97 filing. And again, local law 97 filing will be done by, either a professional engineer or an architect. So working with the person, now they can, do the filing and do the, measurement all at the same, time and under the same engagement. So, just recapping, it's really important to, ensure that your emissions, are calculated correctly. Your energy and your carbon usage are accurately reflect what's going on within the building, and making sure that only pertains to, your particular building and not some of the adjacent buildings, ensuring that you're accounting for all of your floor area and the different space types. And then, implementing, your carbon emissions reduction measures where, where it makes sense for your buildings, and whether you're on Article 320, 321 and have to implement the, prescriptive energy measures, or, over the next 5 years, if you're looking to implement some of those capital improvement projects, that are identified. And as I mentioned, doing and, dovetailing the local law 87 energy audit, which is required every 10 years, and combining that and putting the lens of the local law 97, so you're understanding the carbon impacts and how much your penalties might be reduced if you do this or not, is an important step. And then, Article 320. So what about buildings that, have penalties for the 2024 period? So if you are going to be subject to penalties starting next year because your energy usage this year is likely to exceed and, trigger a, excess carbon, there are some things that you can do to, mitigate those penalties. So obviously, we would have to submit the emissions report by the filing deadline. And then you would have to comply with, local law 84. You will have to be, and that's just simply your benchmarking. You're probably already there. And as Peter went through, you have to be compliant with local law 88. So that means that all of the lighting upgrades and the lighting controls and the sub meters have all been installed prior to that point, to the point of filing, and ideally by the end of this year, which is what the letter of the law states. And then you have to do one of the following: either demonstrate that certain conditions apply to the property. Typically, that's a financial hardship, and that may be more difficult to prove. But the other one is having a decarbonization plan. So typically, that decarbonization plan starts with an energy audit. And doing that energy audit with a registered design professional, and coming up with a plan to, decarbonize and meet those future limits. So it doesn't mean that you have to have those things implemented by May 1st, but it means you have to have a plan in place to do that, to do those limits. And before I go there, I just want to touch base a little bit more on that, investment grade energy audit. Certainly considering doing the early compliance with local law 87 is a really good way to reduce your costs. And make sure you're working with a company that is going to evaluate, both traditional energy savings measures as well as electrification. It's really important that when you're looking at electrification, you understand not only what the capital expenses are related to electrification, but also the operation expense escalation, especially with electrification. So, the goal of Local Law 97 in a way is to electrify New York City buildings, but electrification can be a very costly program for buildings to do, both on the capital side, but also on the operation side. So your maintenance could go significantly up. So it's really important that when you do these evaluations, you understand the impact of how much your electricity costs will go up relative to what you're paying in natural gas, and compare that to, what your fines would be under Local Law 97. So having all of that information is really important as you develop your long-term capital plan, and engaging with a consultant that's going to look at your building uniquely, and identify what the best pathways are for your building, and that includes also looking and taking into account some of your major equipment, and what's the expected useful life of that equipment, and what are your options when that equipment is going to be aged out, obsolete, or replacing that before it gets fixed, and understanding what some of the rebate and financing options like PACE, and really trying to have a plan over the next 5 years, 10 years to implement those projects, and make sure that those projects actually achieve the reductions that you're looking for. If you finish a project up at 2029 and you think it's going to achieve 30% savings, and you only get 25, well, then you're still subject to penalties. So it's important to not wait till the very last minute to get these projects capitalized and then actually implemented. So I will end that there. And Rebecca, go ahead. You're on mute, Rebecca.
Thank you. People were just missing my comment that is exactly what I said earlier today. The buildings need time to plan for and fund capital projects. They can't just happen, unfortunately, overnight. So it's a good idea to get an advance start. We have a couple questions in the chat. I'm going to skip around and start with the gross floor area, just because today I looked up to buildings between 25,000 and 50,000 square feet that happen to be on oil, both of whom face small penalties starting in 2024. And it turned out that both of them had the numbers that were in the DOF's website for gross square feet. So if a building doesn't have that and they choose not to do the measurement because they're okay for penalties, once it's stamped, are they allowed to go back and measure, or is that sort of final then throughout Local Law 97? Do you know?
So yeah, I mean, not all buildings are going to be able to complete a detailed area measurement. I don't, we have a long list of buildings, and we're obviously prioritizing those buildings that are going to have penalties. So yeah, buildings can get those measurements done after the fact. Typically, we see buildings, usually gain some area. We actually have a building that we did a measurement on that was right on the border and turned out to be a little bit under 25,000 feet. So we're in the process, and I'm not directly involved in this, but we are going through the process to actually try to get them removed. So buildings that are on the on the fence on whether they'll have to even be on that covered buildings list, it's worth getting that measurement done to just see if you're above or below the threshold. And best cases, we measure it bigger, best cases, we measure it and it's a little smaller and you don't even have to comply. Worst cases, we measure it, it's a little bigger and you have a little bit more, allowance for emission. So it's kind of a win-win for buildings that are in that, right on that 25,000 square foot hover.
And following on that, we have a question. Is the footprint of our garage under our outside plaza area space part of gross floor area in terms of
Yeah, if it's a
measurement?
covered garage, or if it's under subterranean garage, yeah, that's in there. It is defined, as we talked about space types before. That would be a parking area. So the emissions limits are actually a lot smaller for parking area, but because those spaces require lighting and ventilation and things, they are allowed emissions too. So it is important that we include that type, and you can see in the historical benchmarking data if the parking area was called out or not.
Where can you access Energy Star Portfolio Manager?
Yeah, you will have to talk to your benchmarking provider and ask them. So your first step would be to create your own portfolio manager account. Maybe that's for your building that you share with that may be the property manager or the super, has access to, and multiple people have access to that. And then you'll need the benchmarking provider to share the data that they've been benchmarking with your particular account.
If we have doctors' offices considered retail space in the co-op space, do we exclude those areas from our filing, or do we have to include them?
Yeah, so all areas within a building are included in the filing. And actually, medical offices have their own category. So that's actually one of the ones where we'd want to really, take a detailed measurement and make sure we call out that space type, because we're going to, you might have MRI machines, you might have X-ray machines. Those things use a lot. We see the medical offices are some of the worst offenders, in terms of their energy usage. So it's really important to include those and call out those space types.
So then we have a question about the energy grades and how they relate to penalties. So a pre-war building with a good energy rating has penalties in 2030. How can they tell what the energy grade is saying about their building's performance?
So there are more parameters that go into the energy grades than what goes into the carbon emissions limit. So it's, if you have an A building, I was on the phone with, Derek Jones, who's on the CNY board. And, their building has an A, they don't have penalties, and they're only $5,000 per year starting in 2035, and that's a 90, it's a post-war building. So, typically buildings that are in that like A and maybe B are likely to have small or little fines, but they will start to see fines, in 2030 or 2035. It's an indicator, it's not a guarantee, but really it's about, it's about how much energy is being used, and what the overall square footage and the space types that go into there. So, if you're a low D and you have a 10, you're probably going to have penalties probably pretty soon. If you're at the opposite end, you're probably not going to have much penalties until down the compliance line.
If brick pre-war buildings have already met 2024 compliance and converted to gas and completed submetering and lighting control work, what are the common recommended projects they should be looking toward 2030 compliance?
Yeah, so I mean, every building is unique, but starting out for that building, I would say, do you have a separate domestic hot water heater so you're not using your boilers year round? Do you have indoor temperature sensors so that you're controlling your boiler and heating system, and you're not overheating the building? Typically, we find, centrally heated buildings are just completely overheated. So those are, on the gas side. And remember, local law 97 is about carbon. So, typically 30% of, if you're a gas building, 30% of your carbon emissions right now are electric and 70% are gas. And sometimes that's even higher. So going after the gas is really the number one thing to help your emissions overall. And remember, the grid is being greened. So, at some point, electricity will have a lower amount of carbon for every kilowatt hour. So you really do want to focus on, gas and oil, the carbon side of the building. And those are also the things that typically 100% of, gas is usually paid for as part of the common area. So that's one thing that you really manage and control. And forget about the gas stoves, because those represent a very small portion of your overall gas usage. It's really, your heating systems, and if you're also using gas for, cooling as well too. So sub-metering, yeah, he mentioned sub-metering. So we'd also look at doing VFDs, just addressing any air penetrations and infiltration, looking at the ventilation system, resealing all the ductwork, putting constant air regulators in your ventilation system, making sure all your motors are properly sized, all the motors have VFDs. And if you have if you have central cooling, having some types of BMS, there's a number of, things that are sub-$1 million, sub-$100,000 that can be done that have really good paybacks. The 3 to 5 years, 6 years, that should be, implemented just right away, and that's something that your local law 87 audit will help to uncover, or just engaging a professional to, do a carbon assessment will help you figure those things out.
So
I have a quick
I'm sorry, go
question.
ahead, Peter.
Are you seeing owners installing the electric heat pump water heaters, like to try to even reduce their, gas or oil consumption on the domestic hot water heating side? Are you seeing that being implemented in any of your projects, or is that still something that's, at least we're finding, fairly expensive to implement?
Yeah, I mean, to my point earlier, and that's a great question, because, evaluating, if you don't have a separate domestic hot water system and you're using your steam boiler for year-round, domestic hot water production, that's a no-brainer to start out with. So you do want to evaluate the options for electric hot water heater, as well as a direct fired natural gas hot water heater. But, generally they are more expensive. You may require electrical upgrades. And the most important component is electricity. While the electric hot water heaters are more efficient than natural gas, it is more expensive to operate those. So typically it has a higher CapEx and it has a higher OpEx. So we're still pushing people mostly toward a natural gas system. However, it's very much, worth understanding, because we are seeing Con Ed is paying for about half of the cost of those, and it will significantly help with your local law 97 carbon penalties. So it's something that should be considered. It's not, as we're still doing majority gas.
So we have a question. I'm going to ask the person to submit the political portion of it to me regarding local law 97. But in terms of the gas, which you were discussing, so if buildings, well, one, I guess we don't know when Con Ed will no longer be giving out any rebates for gas. I heard that, that's coming at some point. But if you put in something that's gas now, like if you switch from oil to gas now for your space heater, or you pull off your domestic hot water heater and put that on gas, how long would that hold you off from having to electrify, in terms of like how, in future periods, like in most cases, is that getting buildings to 2040, or are they having to electrify early and get rid of the gas? Or is it hard to tell?
It's it's obviously unique to buildings, because the cost for gas conversions, can range, a lot, especially if you have taller buildings and the chimney requirements. But yeah, I mean, converting to natural gas, we'll see to at least 2030, maybe to 2035. And like I mentioned, over with Derek Jones's building, those guys, have, only they're looking at like $5,000 in penalties per year in 2035 under their current gas burning scenario. So the costs, increases, forgetting about the capital expense side, but on the operating expense side, if they were to electrify, really exceed that. So I think it's something worthwhile, exploring, and getting the benefit of the cheaper gas now while it's available, because at some point we think in the near future that getting new gas connections will not be available. And Con Ed does offer rebates once you're on gas to reduce that cost, so you can then install like heat timers and in-unit temperature sensors, and they have either prescriptive or performance-based incentives that will help reduce the costs of some of those management systems.
Um, sorry, I'm going to just read the questions in order because I think they're, okay. Well, that's for local 88. Our laundry company runs gas for the dryers, or would electric dryers help with carbon reduction?
They would, yes.
So that would be a recommended solution usually?
It is an option to reduce your carbon emissions. It's important to understand what that impact is. Your boiler and heating systems are going to be your major contributor. Second is going to be laundry, and then third is going to be your stoves. So kind of in that order. So you have to just understand, what the cost, implications are going to be for that. It will help. It's not going to be the same as, it's only a few percent of your total gas. It's not, how much the boiler is contributing to it or your hot water system is contributing to it.
Our APOCA, I probably didn't pronounce it right, but you know what I'm talking about. Heat pumps recommended for brick pre-war buildings. I've seen these models can run on 115 volts, so it seems to require less labor costs and electric work.
So yeah, those AFOCA units, right? So those still do require penetrations into the walls. I think two, core drills have to go through the walls to install those units. There's still probably over $10,000, per apartment unit to install. And if you're at a, 110, 120 volts, you're probably only achieving partial electrification. So you're, so you're not doing 100% of your heating requirements. But that's actually a strategy that we are certainly evaluating and recommending in some cases to buildings. So with a partial electrification strategy, you would install, a unit like that, and maybe, you would heat your building up to the statutory minimum. And then, and that's only, that's below 70 degrees. And then your residents can then heat their spaces above that to their desire. So what that does is it reduces the overall gas consumption at the building level. It reduces, your overheating a building, and then you shift the responsibility directly to the tenants or the residents, I should say, the shareholders, and their electric bills. But it is more expensive to heat your space with electricity. On the positive side is when you have those units, typically they replace those, can replace through wall AC units. Are going to be more efficient at cooling, so you will have some benefits on the cooling side. So partial electrification is something that should be evaluated, and Con Ed does have a rebate, under the Clean Heat program when you do 50% or more of heating, with those type of units. And there's not a lot of those models out right now. FOCA or EFICA, however you want to say it, is one of the leading ones. I know Radiator Labs has a unit that's coming out. I think we're going to see more of these things come to the market where you can have these packaged heat pumps that can fit into the through walls. And right now installation is not as easy as replacing an air conditioner. There is more to it, so it is more expensive for installation, and hopefully those things come down over the next few years and they become a better and more viable option.
Right. Right. And CNYC, we're working very hard to try to get NYSERDA to consider shareholders and unit owners as homeowners for purposes of the Here and Her programs, which would greatly increase the benefits that would be available through those to individuals that meet income requirements, like if you have enhanced star, for instance. So hopefully that will help with pay for that. Does Local Law 97 recognize the cogen system as an approved Local Law 97 item? They're going to be introducing rules. Do you want to?
There are going to be rules about how they treat, cogeneration systems, but just remember cogens are running off natural gas, and so you will have penalties related to the natural gas consumption. They have a specific kind of carve out that is less beneficial than when the law was originally written. So it used to look a little bit better for cogen systems. Now it doesn't look quite as good. So, we're not seeing a lot. Let's just say we're not seeing a lot of new cogen systems being installed in New York City right now as a strategy. But if you have one, I mean, it's hopefully paid for itself, and it's doing doing good things for your building.
This is on the submetering gas.
Yeah.
Do you want? It says, is that a
So
possibility?
just real quick, you can't submeter gas. Con Edison and the utilities don't allow for that. And when if we're talking about residential apartments, and if you're concerned about submetering gas for people's stoves, don't be too concerned. Stoves are only accounting for a small percentage of your overall building's gas usage. If you have a restaurant or a similar large type of commercial gas user and they're directly tapped off of your main gas service, that's something where you would look to go to Con Ed and have them have a direct service. I will say that most restaurants and commercial spaces have direct meter gas with Con Ed. So if you're worried about your neighbors cooking too much, shouldn't be a big concern if that's where the gas submetering was come from. But you are not allowed to do that. So it's not even an option on the table.
Any thoughts to share on cozy covers for pre-war buildings?
Yeah, I mean, they are looking at addressing overheating in buildings. Like I'll say this, cozies that's the Radiator Lab product. They are a good product. They are the Cadillac of radiator covers, right? There are other things, we like TRVs, we like orifice plates, so thermostatic radiator valves. Cozies require electricity. There are other options like, steam trap replacement is an important thing. Or if you don't want to do the steam trap replacement, replacing and putting in an orifice plate, which limits the overall amount of steam in the radiator, is another option. And then, I had mentioned before about in-unit temperature sensors. So it's really important to, install in-unit temperature sensors covering all sides of the building, like east, west, north, south, and then at different floors. So you don't have to cover, every apartment unit, but you want to be covering high, low, and medium floors, and then all sides to see and make sure the building's evenly heated. And then if your building has steam distribution, then you can actually modulate where the steam's going. And that's also something, if you don't have that, to consider adding that in, because you may find that, certain sides or areas of the building are overheated. And then so by adding some distribution level controls to your steam heated building, you can achieve some savings. So I would really be looking before the cozy covers to, address the overheating of the building, and then, looking at some of the in-unit measures, whether that's the more expensive cozy or a more modest cost TRV or orifice plate.
Right. And I think actually Kelvin is going to be in one of the 3 Local Law 97 classes at the conference with energy, not the heat timer, but now the monitoring system for the boilers, etc. So you can check that out. Do you have any thoughts on solar on roofing?
I mean, solar on roofing is a good option, but the most economical installations are on buildings that have larger roofs. So if you have a small roof area, your costs for installation, especially on like a per watt basis, are higher than if you have a much larger roof installation. Roof. Period. So. And then also understand that you have to have, like a new or relatively new roof before you put that solar on the roof. So, work with, solar installers or design professionals like ourselves and understand what the economics of that system are. But if you have a small roof footprint, it may be pretty costly and have a high payback. You want something sub 10 years. But right now, there's really good tax incentives. New York Sun program has a really good program, and the community solar is also another good program that can help reduce the costs of solar if you have a good, building footprint for solar.
Oh, thank you for answering that, Peter. I was just about to read it out. I know you're not a fortune teller. We all wish you were, Thomas. But do you anticipate any air to water systems that would be able to replace a boiler that is not so big and heavy? We looked into it, but our roof couldn't handle it. I guess you know what that refers to because now it's beyond
like
my.
on the DRF type of, yeah. I mean, it's a challenge for rooftops. You need the spaces. So yeah, I crystal ball. I don't, technology hopefully becomes more efficient and lighter over time, and ideally, less costly. But if we're not there now, it may take a lot for us to get there.
Is it $10,000 per? How did you pronounce the name of the Italian unit?
Effica. I mean,
Effica,
that's like
thank you.
a base kind of price we see. I mean, the range is anywhere from 10 to 30 to $50,000 per units to install heat pumps because of the electricity requirements.
And
So
that's
something
per unit, not per apartment. I mean, obviously you need one every place where you'd
well,
have
yeah,
a
I guess it
radiator.
depends how big your apartment is, how many you need. But yeah, if you have a studio, you need one. If you have a 1 bedroom, you would need at least 2 units. So it's just like think of how many ACs you have, and then you would go from there. 10,000 is at the very low end. I just kind of throwing out a starting point, but it's by no means the end point.
Yeah, that would be nice. The Adams administration shared that they intended to reduce requirements for spacing on roofs to improve the economics of installing solar in the city of Yes, which I think that's already passed, But is there an expectation such will pass and owners should wait to consider installing solar? Didn't they allow them to put up the canopies so that was right? That was already passed, no? Or
yeah, I mean, again, it goes back. If you have a really small roof, it just may not pencil out. So you can see what it looks like now, get a quote and get, and look at what the economics are. If it's not good, it's probably not going to get that much, unless your roof gets bigger, it's probably not going to get much better. If you do have like, especially a shorter building and a big roof, or you have a separate parking area, those are the type of spaces that can really benefit from solar, and it can become more economical.
right. Do you have advice for a building where someone who wants to lease their roof for solar has come in? Or is there a way that they can compare that to what they would be able to do if they did it themselves, or
Yeah, so
anything
it's not so much that you're leasing your roof out, but I touched on the community solar program. So you can, solar can basically be used directly by the building. That's typically it it's behind the meter, it feeds into your building, and it reduces your overall electricity, requirements from the grid. Alternatively, you can put that solar system on your roof and go through the community solar program, and you're effectively giving that solar energy back to the grid. Con Ed then pays you the market rate for that electricity, and you actually still get the local law 97 benefits of that solar system. So community solar is a really good system, and it also has increased incentives. And sometimes the value of that electricity may be more, in a community solar program than what it is for yourself. So that, again, this is one of those things where, working with your RDP or even, a solar installer can help you understand the economics and what the options and what the benefits are to the different programs.
So we have two more solar questions, and then I think we're going to close up soon since we've already run over, but we'll see. Could you also buy from a community solar? So is that a possibility? You could buy solar energy. Would that help your emissions? How would that work?
It really, buying the community solar is really going to help. It gives you a slight discount on Con Ed, and you have to go through an aggregator to get an allocation of the community solar. Sometimes your management company may have a line on this. Typically, these community solar programs get subscribed to very quickly because you get a discount on there. Local Law 97 does have a pathway to where you can offset, up to 10% of your electricity usage with the purchase of RECs. Those are renewable energy credits. Those have to be locally generated renewable energy credits. Right now, there really aren't credits available on the market. So that's not yet a viable option. Perhaps that will be something that is more, available in the marketplace in the future. But yeah, if you hear about an opportunity to sign up for community solar, we would definitely look into that, because it does provide you at least a discount on the electricity allocation that you get.
Right. And there are a couple of groups that are actually trying to provide community solar now, that are looking in various areas throughout Manhattan, and I know we're still in meetings to find out about them, but
yeah, it's really, you need a big roof, is the whole thing for solar. It's not necessarily going to be the magic bullet for your typical, co-op or condo, unfortunately.
Right. And the last question is also about solar. We've been approached by leasing companies who represent that we'd get local law 97 energy credits, and using renewable energy will lower carbon emissions, thus lowering exposure to fines. Thomas seems to say that if we sell the electricity to the grid, this means we'll get a benefit. But if a third party does it, are we getting the benefit? So I guess if they put solar on their roof, I don't know.
So my honest opinion on this is, what you want to do is you want to own your solar system and figure out a way to finance that solar system. Anybody that's trying to lease your roof is going to be, going at it from a kind of a different perspective. And they put, there's cost to finance this stuff, which is typically, they're putting more cost to finance than what you might be able to get by recapitalizing your, mortgage at the building. So, work with a solar installer, get a cost for the installation, but figure out how to own that system yourself, whether or not you participate in a community solar program or you take the solar energy directly to the building. You don't want to I wouldn't recommend leasing your roof to do that, for that purpose. It's going to be more economical long-term for for the building and its shareholders to do that, to own that system directly.
That was the last question.
Cool.
So thank you, Thomas. Thank you, Peter. Everyone will be getting the slides. It has Peter and Thomas's contact information, so feel free to reach out to them. It'll have my email address as well, and I'll be providing all the links we discussed earlier. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending and spending your evening with us. And thank you, Thomas and Peter, for your help. Good night.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Night.